Um, 50 years ago, most people learned about transportation on the job. And there weren't many ways you could learn about the things like the laws, the regulations, the rules that govern the transportation and logistics industry. That was the reason for the creation of this council in 1974. And it's been our continuous mission, education for transportation professionals. This is going to be the 8th of our virtual workshops. One of the featured sessions in many of our annual conferences has been the role of freight brokers in the transportation industry. And this year, for the first time, we're presenting as a virtual workshop what you need to know about brokers. We're pleased to have 4 experienced and very knowledgeable representatives from the broker industry, as well as my friend and colleague, Brent Primus, who will moderate the session. As Dan mentioned, in April, we're going to be featuring 3 in-depth seminars that traditionally have been presented as full-day live seminars each year in the spring and the fall. Transportation, logistics, and the law, freight claims in plain English, and contracting for transportation and logistics service. And then starting again in May, we're going to be lining up more interactive education virtual workshops each month. And we'll be announcing details about those shortly. You're all waiting to hear and learn what you need to know about brokers. So I'm turning the mic over to our moderator, Brent Primus, and his 5-star panel. Thank you.
George, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. My name is Brent Wm. Primus. I'm a transportation attorney and currently serve as the Director of Virtual Education for the Transportation Logistics Council. I'd like to begin today by asking the panelists to do a self-introduction. And as part of their introduction, I would like them to tell, briefly their name and their title at their company, and also to tell the audience a little bit general profile of their particular brokerage company. So I'll start here. I'm looking at the PowerPoint there, so I'll start at the upper right with Chris.
Thanks, Brent. Great to be here today. Chris Burroughs, the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Transportation Intermediaries Association, the professional organization representing about 1,600 3PLs and freight brokers in the space. I myself am in charge of the legislative and regulatory issues before the association, representing TIA on Capitol Hill, before Congress and federal agencies. And look forward to the conversation today, and happy to have 3 of our members of TIA on the call with us. Thanks, Brent.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And I'll just add about Chris is he's always been very helpful. So if people have questions about legislation or something like that, I've always found Chris to be very responsive. Okay, now in alphabetical order, moving from left to right, we've got Kristy Knichel. Kristy.
Hi, everyone. Kristy Knichel, President and CEO of Knichel Logistics. I took over the business from my father in 2007, been in the industry for 24 years. We are a third-party logistics provider, but we're also a IMC, which is an intermodal marketing company. The majority of what we do is ship freight on the railroad, but we also have a truck brokerage, and we also do LTL services as well. I am also a TIA member, as Chris mentioned, and I do sit on the board as the intermodal chair. And I also am a woman-owned certified company. So very proud of that. And thanks for having me today and looking forward to it.
Okay. Next, John.
Hi, thanks, Brent. John Miller, worked in trucking and brokerages and also on the shipping side. I worked at Cargill for 5 years. Started Plains Dedicated in 2007. We primarily work with the under 10 truck owner operators, teaching them, training them how to run successful fleets. Our goal is to teach people how to grow from a 1 truck to a 5 truck to a 10 truck fleet.
All right. Now, the goal of the session today, I'm going to look at my notes to make sure I get it right. is to facilitate mutual understanding by shippers of brokers and by brokers of shippers in the common goal of getting shippers' products safely to market. Put another way, it's not intended to be a gripe session for shippers to vent their grievances. The inspiration for this session was a shippers panel at the 2019 TIA annual meeting. That was comprised of 4 shippers who gave their thoughts about using brokers and also answered questions from brokers in the audience. I was in attendance that day. And right after that, I talked to Chris in the hallway and we started brainstorming a brokers panel to present at a TLC. Originally, the concept was it was going to be at the 2020 TLC annual meeting, which didn't occur. So here we are today. Now, I want to start. We're only going to have one PowerPoint here today. Dan, could you put that on the screen, please, for us?
Brent, you forgot to let me introduce myself.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry.
If I'm going to stay on, I should at least take a moment to introduce myself.
Yeah, I beg your forgiveness.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I get it.
Okay.
If I'm going to be on, I should at least do that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm Omar Singh, president and founder of Surge Transportation. Happy to be here today. Thank you all for attending and, you know, helping us to participate, put this together. The president and founder of Surge Transportation. We've been open. I've been in the business since really out of high school, but we've been open as an independent company since 2016. And we focus on helping very large kind of Fortune 1000 shippers with sort of backup contingency capacity strategies for when their routing guide starts to experience volatility throughout the year, which happens just in different times with different shippers. So that's what we do, and very happy to be here and participate today. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us. I know that all the panelists are very busy business people, as is Chris. So again, it's really nice they could take the time to be here. Now, with that in mind, Dan, could you put up that history slide? Okay, here you go. I'll give the folks, audience, a few minutes to read this. So here we have a quote from the Interstate Commerce Commission from a decision they wrote in 1987, saying how at the time of 1980, there was only 100 brokers in the country, less than. And then when they wrote this in 87, there were 500. And it's almost like they put an exclamation mark on the end of that, over 500. Well, that was 97. I'm sorry, 87. Now, look where we are now today. This information, by the way, Chris provided me. 15,000 brokers as of 2015, 24,000 licensed brokers as of 2020. So it's come a long way in just the last 20 some years. It kind of took off during the 90s, and then during the 00s really exploded. But so we've had this explosive growth, and you'll see a lot in the trade press, the mainstream trade press, the Wall Street Journal type things. They'll talk about, you know, logistics is exploding and blah, 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 making it all sound great. You know, you read in the papers, the trade press, all the acquisition activity going on, mergers and so forth. But there's one thing to keep in mind behind this. It all sounds great, you know, but I was chatting a few years ago in the hallway at a TIA conference, and there was a fellow who had been around for quite a while, close to my generation. And at that time, XPO was really in the news a lot about all their acquisitions and that. And I said, Tom, this is really something, huh? And he says, Brent, we're all fishing out of the same pond. So I thought about that. My first thought was, he meant that they're all looking to the same customer base. And then having thought about it more, I realized the other pond you're all fishing out of is the carriers or the number of trucks. So ultimately, regarding regardless of how many separate broker entities there are, they're all dependent on the level of freight and the demand for movement of freight. So in some ways, when you get to 24,000, you're just cutting the slices of the pie a little bit slimmer. Similarly, if you can't find trucks, it doesn't matter, you know, whether you have 100 brokers or 24,000 brokers, you have to have the capacity. So I just make that observation. Now, with that in mind, we're going to turn to the questions. Now, the questions are not intended to be gotcha questions. In fact, the panelists were circulated these well ahead of time. John and Chris were provided the questions in the spring of 2020, so they've had a year to think about them. The other panelists have had a few weeks. And so what I'm going to do, I originally had 10, I cut it down to 7 after our practice session the other day. And I'm hoping to get through these today. Now, they're all great questions, and I was having a little trouble deciding which one to lead off with. So here's what I decided. I have them all on cue cards. So what I'm going to do now is shuffle the deck kind of at random to determine what will be our first question. And what came up, interestingly, you know, I did this a few times this morning to practice. 4 out of 5 times this one came up. So I don't know if there's some message from above coming down or there's a crink in the paper, but here we go. Here's the question. Based on your experience, what mistakes have you seen shippers make in using a broker? Who would like to go first on that? Okay, Kristy, and then unmute, please. There you go.
Thank you. I would say that not all brokers are created equal. It's a fragmented industry, so don't think that they're all the same except for cost. Using the lowest cost fly-by-night brokers is the biggest mistake shippers can make. Encourage shippers to visit the broker too, or have them visit you. You want a long-term relationship with your broker, so vetting up front is less expensive and smart. It can pay off down the road in terms of protecting your company.
Okay, thank you. Omar, John, you want to supplement that? Omar.
Yeah. I think, you know, from probably the most positive angle I could say is I think that a lot of times, even though brokers are experienced in the industry, often they don't know a specific or a unique shipper's actual site profile needs. And so they may take for granted that that broker has a lot of experience, but they don't onboard them all the way so that they fully understand kind of the needs of that individual customer, and almost can sort of set up to fail. So whereas you may have a good broker that has experience and a shipper that certainly has needs, and kind of they operate under the assumption that, well, if we get started, you should know what's going on and understand, and they don't. And I've had experiences like that where kind of we got off to a rougher start, and then kind of had a regroup right after, say, the first 30 days and said, what happened? You know, we had a hard time getting started. And so, oh, well, we didn't onboard you because maybe this site operates differently than this site, and these expectations are different. Even though it's the same large company, different sites just have different needs. And so I think really taking the time in the beginning to, you know, focus on sitting down, having an onboarding conversation about what's really going on, can go a long way to make the relationships successful.
You know, John, I just want to add something to what Omar said. I agree with that, like 110, 120%. I also, you know, I present quite a bit to brokers groups, and this is the same message I tell the brokers. Don't just sign up the customer, get to know what they're shipping for I believe they're brokers in the audience, you know. So shippers should check out the brokers, but the brokers, I think, have a duty or good diligence to, you know, what's the value of your shipper's cargo? What are you shipping? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, John, mistakes you've seen.
Go ahead. I want to apologize. My neighbor decided to start mowing his lawn as soon as we started this. So if you hear the lawn mowing, that was not intentional.
Well, we can't hear it, so.
So I would say the other thing I would add to that, they were perfect on that, is use a TIA member. There's 24,000 brokers in the industry. There's 1,600 or 1,900 of us, I believe, somewhere between that range. I think it changed. That are TIA members that have a code of ethics, that pay within 30 days and have all of these requirements that make us better brokers in the industry. So like both of these guys said, is have a relationship with the shipper. Brokers should have a relationship with their shipper. The shipper should understand that they're working with a broker who is a TIA member or somebody who has those ethics and holds standards.
Thank you, John. Kristy, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing too. I think one important thing as well is I know sometimes that you might have a bad experience with a broker, and then you might feel that all brokers are the same way. I think all different brokers have different niches in different markets. So I think that's something too to keep in mind, that, you know, with what John said at the TIA, I mean, there's a lot of brokers out there, and we all have different niches that could potentially help you that maybe another broker couldn't. So I think that's a good thing to remember as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm going to move along a little bit. The next question came up randomly, is this one, having to do with vicarious liability for accidents on the highway. By far the greatest contingent financial exposure faced by shippers is vicarious liability for highway accidents. Can using a broker mitigate that risk? And if so, how? So I'm going to ask our business brokers if they care to address that. And then for sure, I want to get Chris Burroughs' take on what the TIA has been doing to help mitigate that risk. So first of all, from the business brokers, anyone want to address that? Anyone want to go first? Kristy, you had your hand up first, so you get to go.
Thanks. I'm prepared. So no, certainly. I mean, a broker is huge insulating factor for a shipper. I mean, the broker vets carriers. We ensure that they're safety compliant. We have appropriate insurance, and they have a contract with the shipper that requires indemnification and insurance coverage. They also protect a shipper from allegations that the shipper controlled the manner in which the carrier performed its obligations. So since the broker is the intermediary, a lot of the times the shipper doesn't even know who the carrier is. In this case, it is very hard to prove that the shipper was controlling the work. So the broker is the buffer when it comes to liability. The broker carrier contract provides protection for the shipper too. The shipper can require that the broker have contingent auto liability as well. When using a broker, you have multiple layers of insurance now between the broker and the carrier that can protect the shipper and their cargo. So this is very protective for the shipper.
All right. Now, there was a lot of information in that. So thank you, Kristy. This, by the way, we are recording this and it'll be available in a few days on the TLC homepage. So to the extent some of these questions, you know, and these answers are worth reviewing, I would encourage you to do so. John, you had a follow up on that, and then I want to turn to Chris. Yeah.
Go ahead. I want to add on the liability. We also have cargo contingent, and that also protects the shipper also. And how that does is I had a couple over the last several years where the carrier, the driver made a mistake, and the insurance would not pay for driver mistakes, where our contingent cargo did cover those driver mistakes. So even though you feel you're protected by some of these insurances that the truckers have, it is another layer of protection for the shipper.
All right, I'm going to turn to Chris now, because I know he has spent over the last few years a lot of time on this issue. Chris, you want to give us the update, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Brent. Yeah, this has been a big concern of TIAs for a number of years now, as the number of cases, nuclear verdicts, if you will, against brokers and shippers continues to increase. And for those that are interested in kind of the severity of the situation, next time you're on Google, type in broker busting. There's about a 30 or 40 page PowerPoint presentation by the trial attorney's law firm down, I believe, in Texas or Florida. where they pinpoint and help other attorneys kind of nail brokers and shippers to the cross, if you will. But there's really two legal theories that keep our guys up at night dealing with liability. One being vicarious liability, which obviously means that, you know, the broker or shipper went too far in their actions with the carrier. The other theory that keeps us up would be negligent selection, which means that you didn't do enough with the carrier. So we always like to tell our guys, and our little anecdotal story is, you know, have fun navigating between a rock and a hard place of not doing enough and doing too much. So what we've been doing is we've been trying to tackle this from two different angles. One, a legislative solution. We've been working on a number of Congresses now, putting together a motor carrier safety selection standard, a federal standard that isn't tort reform, that isn't, you know, state preemption, but currently one that doesn't exist, that our members could point towards as a minimum defense of saying, hey, I followed the federal standard in selecting this carrier. We've come through many different iterations of legislation. Currently, or in the last Congress, we had a bill introduced in the House of Representatives that had 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans on board, a great bipartisan common sense solution to address this problem. Again, this is not tort reform. It will not eliminate the lawsuits. It doesn't absolve liability. That would be obviously ideal, but not a reality in Congress. So we feel like this is a very good step to address the problem. And, you know, we feel very confidently with, and this Congress, obviously with it being very narrowly thin, you know, you have a 50-50 Senate and a very narrow majority in the House with Democrats having controlled that body. We feel confident we have a good possibility to try to get this finally into law. The other, you know, tactic we're taking is where we've helped several members by filing amicus briefs for a number of cases that have gone through these district courts. And, you know, we're hoping for some good precedents there, obviously from the legal point of view, because as I mentioned, without federal standard, without a federal motor carrier safety standard in place, it's really these state courts and the precedents that's coming out from these different courts that are really setting the standard. And as we all know, this is interstate commerce. You can't predict where something may happen. And obviously with, you know, multiple different standards out there and multiple different courts being where they're at, it really puts our guys in a rock and a hard place. But this has been our top legislative priority for a number of years and will continue to be until we get this across the finish line.
Okay, thank you. Before we move to the next question, Omar, you want to add on to this, or you think it's been covered?
I think you guys have it mostly covered. I would just say that, you know, one of the things that I think that we probably, you know, bring value to our customers in just the bandwidth. You know, a very general rule is, you know, that they don't have the bandwidth to deal with more than 100 service providers, say. And they certainly don't have the bandwidth to deal with drivers individually, so they can deal with large, you know, asset-based fleets. And so, you know, we're able to deal directly with the drivers. You know, we work with thousands of providers and sort of make sure that the expectation is that they'll drive safely, obey the law, you know, kind of have it in the contracts, but also in the coaching of our teams, and make sure everybody kind of is on the same page there. And I think that is something that can also go a long way, you know, to help shippers and the drivers to know that, you know, safety is the first priority, and we're always going to drive that. So
the prevention angle.
Yeah.
All right. Now, speaking of drivers, we got to the next random question. High value shipments. For high value shipments, and I'll define that today as being in excess of $100,000. That's the number I picked because most truckers will have $100,000 in cargo insurance. And by the way, well, I won't get started on cargo insurance. So I'll finish the question before I give a speech. For high value shipments, i.e. in excess of $100,000, wouldn't it make more sense for a shipper to work directly with a national carrier focused on high value shipments rather than to rely on whatever driver the broker finds on a load board? Okay, John, you were first there.
No. And the reason being is that I'll go back to the example I used on the liability. We had 2 claims last year that the driver made an error in setting the reefer. We're primarily a reefer brokerage division, and they made a mistake setting the reefer, and the cargo insurance did not cover those mistakes. Our cargo insurance picked it up. So by working with a large carrier or a small carrier, you could have those cargo insurance companies not pay those bills by driver error. Whereas we have another layer that protects the shipper, that we have another layer of insurance that they could go and recover.
And your insurance would cover the higher value loads, I take it?
Yes, we have a 250,000 on all of our customers, and most carriers have 100,000. So we don't have to go out and add new insurance every time there's a high value load, whereas most carriers do. Even large carriers sometimes will have to go out and add. They've got 100,000. They still have to go out and go supplemental insurance if it's over 100,000.
Kristy, Omar, thoughts? Omar?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense, in all of this, like I said, I think our average customer works with, on average, 100 service providers. And so you want to keep kind of diversification in your network. And yes, it makes sense to work with motor carriers who have 200 or 250,000 or whatever the need is. But I think it also makes sense to have some strategic partnerships with brokers who, like John said, who do carry the coverages, because it is out there for us to be able to purchase. And, sometimes we even, over the years, when we develop kind of a higher sort of ratio or lower ratio of claims, can, get all risk cargo insurance earlier than some motor carriers can. So I wouldn't say it makes sense. I think most of my customers work 90% of their freight with large motor carriers and about 10% with brokers. So both of them make sense, and both of them can work if you select your partners, thoroughly and make sure they have what you need. So, yeah.
Kristy? Want to
Yeah, I
add to
think
that?
Omar and John covered it, pretty well. I mean, obviously some of the freight we have, that requires that amount. We have the 250,000 coverage as well. So we carefully vet those carriers. We know who those carriers are. They're trusted, and we use them on a daily basis. So you're not going to go to a load board just to find a carrier that you don't know, to cover freight like that. So that's something that, we do on a daily basis with some of the freight we work with. So, but yeah, that's all I have to add to that one. Thanks.
All right. So as Kristy did provide a write-up of some of her answers. And as she said the other day, well, we don't just go to the load boards to find a driver. So what does that tell us? And what she said today about her process, I think that takes us back to the shippers having to do with your due diligence in selecting a broker, because some brokers do just go to the load board and grab whatever trucker's there. Typically on a Friday afternoon, 3 o'clock. The shipper calls, they need a load moved. A lot of brokers, they just go to the load board, they fax out a contract, the contract signed and faxed back, and they check the insurance and off they go. So what does that tell us? That tells us, again, the due diligence in a broker, which I'm going to, the next question that came up randomly is actually kind of a related question, and maybe it's the same answer. Couldn't quite decide whether to include it or not, but since the Ouija board brought it up next, it's the same question for temperature controlled loads. Wouldn't it make more sense to work with a carrier who's focused on temperature controlled loads? As we know, the council deals a lot with, our emphasis in training is on loss and damage claims. That was the core competency of the council over the years, the textbooks it's published. The temperature controlled loads have a lot of problems. That's where you get the phone calls and emails. So again, I know there are carriers, national carriers that, I'm not going to name names, that focus on temperature control. I think the answer is similar, but I'm going to ask John this question since I know he focuses on temperature controlled loads.
So no, in all honesty, the industry for temperature controlled is very fragmented. It has 120% turnover and driver turnover. So even using a large asset carrier, you're not going to get the same driver on the same load every week, week in and week out. There are a lot of brokers, and I think you touched on that 24,000. I think when you're talking to groups like Omar, Kristy, me, and any TIA member, we're not actively posting 80% of our freight on a board. It might be 20%. And that 20% is because our shipper capacity spiked and they can't find the capacity. So from the refrigerated side, I'm going to touch on this in two ways. First off, I'll explain that mistake the drivers made, our insurance covered it and the carriers would not have. The refrigerated side is also a very fragmented industry, and 90% of our carriers are under 10 trucks. And that's why we specifically help those people grow, because otherwise you have to deal with the 100, the 250, the 1,000 truck fleets to be in the refrigerated market. So to answer your question, it is, do you feel more comfortable sending in a broker truck than a company truck or an asset truck? The question is build your relationship with a broker or the trucker and make sure they're sending in the same driver to haul your freight every week, whether it's a broker or a trucker. If they have low turnover or a broker has relationships, you're going to get the same driver week in and week out. If you're using spotty brokers, you're going to get different people in there every week, week in and week out, and you're going to have a lot of claims.
A very good observation. Now, we're moving along here a little bit. So one question came in. I think I'm going to interrupt the flow here from the pre-planned, because this is a variation of the question of one of the three that I dropped. And that was a question: why would I use a smaller mid-size broker as opposed to a national broker, the household name brokers? I won't name names. So I dropped that question. Well, hang on, Kristy. Now here's the question that came in that does name names. So I'll just read it. To any or all the panelists: why should I use you instead of XPO? So I can't tell who submitted that. I don't know if it was someone from XPO or not, but so I don't want to pick on XPO or single them out, but let's just treat that question as, a large national broker, household word broker. Why use the little guys? Kristy has her hand up.
Love to answer this question. So I think that in general, a shipper will still reap the benefits of a broker from the buffer insulator standpoint, no matter what the size of the broker, given the contracts, insurance requirements that are properly in place. Large brokers generally have a large geographic footprint that could be advantageous if the shipper's logistics needs are changing and becoming more complex. Larger brokers are generally well positioned to meet any technology requirements that shippers may have. With a smaller broker, generally speaking, they're going to service the heck out of the business that does fit their network and capabilities. From a technology standpoint, although they may not have all of the same capabilities of the large brokers, the technology has become much more readily available and cost effective for even the smallest of brokers. Mid-sized brokers, you can generally get the best of both worlds. They are large enough to be able to help the shipper scale and offer them services, but are small enough where you're still receiving white glove type service. And this is something that, I feel strongly about, because, we do have, I feel, that type of service, that white glove service, where we're able to, give those larger or any customer, I guess, kind of the needs that they're looking for that they could get from a large competitor as well, or a large broker. And we've seen that from our customers. Some of the customers we do ship with that are large will tell us, the attention to detail that they might get from a smaller mid-sized broker at times. But I also think too, it depends on the needs of the shipper, and it depends on what the niches that these other brokers are in too. So, I feel how that plays out. I don't know if John and Omar have more to add to that, but that's how I feel about that situation.
All right. So again, the question is, oh, and by the way, we had a supplement came in from the questioner to clarify. He's not from XPO. He's a regional co-packer and a warehouser. All right. So Omar, John, you want to supplement what Kristy said? You know, why use you guys instead of, you know, the household name everybody knows and loves?
I mean, I could probably spend the better part of the afternoon or week, you know, talking about this. It's kind of fun. It's what we present on, and it's our value. I think there are lots of reasons, right? I mean, so that's what I'm saying. I could go on, but I'll think of a couple, right? Sort of like Kristy said, you know, a lot of the large national firms try to do everything that is out there and grab up as much sort of primary business and diversified layers of business within business. I mean, it's our business strategy as well. But for the most part, almost like shopping, you know, you could go to a boutique store to look for something that you really need that you might not be able to find at a large national box store. So there are brokers or brokerages that focus in either niche areas or niche strategies, or they're just more specialized in what they do than what you're going to get and maybe kind of a cookie cutter relationship at a large firm. And so just like niche exists in retail and it exists in medical, think of, you know, heart surgeons versus general practitioner, you know, it exists in our business as well. So depending on what your needs are, you may be able to find a small or medium-sized brokerage that is able to be more effective than a large firm. Also, I would say, you know, to be honest, you know, and I'm just trying to be honest, I think there's a talent pool, you know, because a lot of small and medium-sized brokerages are run by entrepreneurs who probably have not just a lot of skin in the game in the relationship, but also a lot of experience, either growing up in the industry or having a lot where, you know, I think sometimes maybe we have enough experience and talent that we're not working for large firms. And so there could be a difference in the talent pool and the quality of the relationship and the provider of who you're working with if we're kind of bold enough to be out there, you know, creating something that didn't exist out of nothing. And usually you'll find that in service level and kind of competency and the quality of the relationship that you have. But those are just two high level to start to answer the question.
John?
Yep, I just the guy stopped mowing. That's the only reason I wanted to get on. No, I'm just kidding. No, you know, they touched on perfect examples. The thing I wanted to say is just add to this is treat it like you do your asset guys. Why do you use a large asset guy? Well, he's got the technology, he's got the volume, he can do RFPs. Why do you need to use a medium asset guy? Well, he's more regionalized. He can focus on my needs. He's not nationwide. He's not focused on California. He's focused on Texas. Well, why do I use a small carrier? He's focused on my region. He's focused on my city, state. He might be 5 states. He might be 1 state. He might be very specific where he works with a very small group of truckers. I think as a shipper, you have to identify what your needs are and where you need to fill your gaps. And that's what I think we've all said throughout this is as intermediaries, we fill a gap in your capacity. We're building future truck lines that might turn into Warner or Swift or Raider, or maybe they turn into nothing and they're a 5-truck line. But without that capacity, you don't have the stretch that you need as a transportation person. So you need to identify what works for you. Maybe it is that corporate guy who comes in a suit and it works perfect for you because he can do an RFP and he can commit to $10-50 million of business a year. Maybe it's the niche and you want to work with the under 10 truck drivers that we deal with. And we're trying to grow fleet. So it's a big, go ahead, Omar, you can add.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just kind of wanted to queue up. But I think also, I mean, I worked at large national firms, you know, for 6 years. And I think they're also broken up into either if it's a W-2 employee style company, you have different what they consider to be branches or offices, and people will experience different service levels working with different offices, and different offices have different competencies. So just because you carry the name, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the same buying experience in working with that company. But also a lot of the large firms are broken up into an agent model where, there are thousands of agents who kind of operate as, independent organizations within the company. So while the umbrella might cover, might have one name, it covers a lot of different offices, thousands of offices, not hundreds. And I've seen in those firms the same thing. There's just very different service levels, very different ability to penetrate the accounts and get to know what's really necessary and to go after different levels of business within the accounts. So yeah, I just wanted to add that I kind of been there, did that for 6 years, and they're very
Right.
different experiences that people have.
What Omar is telling us is, one of my axioms is all is illusion. In other words, you may think it's a large national company, but actually it's 1,000 little guys under one umbrella. Kind of like well, I won't say what it's like. And a theme here that I detect is, and it's kind of running through all these answers, there's all kinds of shippers. I don't even know how many shippers there are, hundreds of thousands of shippers, millions of shippers, whatever it might be. They're all kind of unique. They have their own products of different characteristics. They have their own geographic area, on and on and on. So I think what the panelists are telling us is match the needs to what's the service being offered. Kristy?
I just wanted to add another thing too that I've noticed in my 24 years of in this business too is, we do compete against the large companies out there. And one thing we have found is that, sometimes those larger companies too, they have, the business that they want to go after. And when there are peak shipping times, there are certain customers that they're going to take care of. And we pick up some of those smaller mid-sized customers that they can't deal with, or, maybe that's just not in their book at that, period of time. So we're able to just pick it up and handle it for them during a peak shipping time, because typically we share in the business year round, but we'll pick up additional business just because the larger guys then are putting their efforts sometimes towards different customers at the time, maybe the larger ones that are out there that have, bigger needs. So that's another reason I feel, using brokers is a benefit, because, we are able to be more flexible and agile in situations when those things happen.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm going to change topics completely here into the area of loss and damage claims. So here's the question. A primary concern of shippers is obtaining a full recovery for loss and damage claims. Under the current statutory framework, brokers do not have liability for cargo claims, but can assume liability by contract. So the question is, should a shipper ever use a broker who is not willing to assume liability for cargo claims by contract? John, you were first hand up.
I'll go back to that again. It's a shipper decision, but I was on the shipping side, and no, I would not. I mean, again, we go back to, this is another layer of protection for the shipper. We as an intermediate protect you with the cargo claims. We protect you at that level. So you're adding another insurance level to protect yourself. All of our contracts, we take full responsibility for claims. I know there's the ability for, and that's one of the worries that shippers have, is that a broker can run away from the claim, just like I'm sure, and I don't know if we'll talk on this one question, but one of them is, what happens if a broker goes out of business? How do I get paid? So it's kind of a similar thing. If the broker doesn't pay my claim, or if the broker doesn't pay my freight bill, what do I do? And it goes back again to the relationships. Make sure you have the relationship. Look at your broker's contract. I mean, I have no problem with sharing mine. I don't know if Omar and Kristy do, but most of my shippers, we're an extension of them. I think Omar and Kristy are the same way. That's why we work well together when we're on panels. We sit down with our shippers, figure out what their needs are. If they need 250, if they need, a good example would be, if you're shipping seafood, a lot of shippers know that they have to make sure that reefer carriers have seafood coverage. If you're using any fly-by-night brokerage, you're not going to get somebody who gets seafood coverage on their refrigerated cargo insurance. So where I'm going with that is, I think shippers should, because I've been on the shipping side and I've kicked out a lot of brokers on the shipping side. That was my job at Cargill, is to kick brokers out of our salt division. But what I found is there were a handful that did a good job, that worked with small carriers. And Omar talked to it. Most shippers don't have time to work with 1,000 carriers or 500 carriers. They definitely don't have time to work with the under 50 carrier, because there's a lot of time spent teaching, educating, just going over accounting issues. So if you find the right people to work with, you're protected. The cargo claims, it's another layer of protection, like we've been talking about the whole time.
All right. Now I want to clarify something, and I want to then make sure I understood your answer. So in this question, when I say assume liability by contract, what I mean is quite literally that the contract language between the broker and the shipper customer would say, the broker hereby assumes liability for cargo claims just as a carrier does, what we call the Carmack Amendment, the liability under the same statutory responsibilities they can assume by contract. And I want to distinguish that from a situation where the broker may have a form of insurance that has different names, contingent cargo, where maybe as a matter of convenience or customer relations, they maintain this insurance to pay the claims, but don't have a contractual obligation to pay the claim. Now, with that, making sure we all understood that. So John, I think I heard you to say to the shippers that you should require that in your contracts. Is that what I heard you to say and what you did at Cargill?
That's my personal opinion. That's what we required. Yes.
Okay.
At Cargill, I don't remember honestly on Cargill.
Right. And but you're telling shippers their best bet is to have the broker contractually agree to what we call Carmack liability.
I'm saying do what's best for the shipper on their behalf and make that decision on their team. So I'm saying they go and make the decision on their team what they do. I'm not saying all shippers, this is the best resource. What I'm saying is I personally accept it. Okay. So that I'm speaking on my personal behalf.
Right.
If a shipper as a group at Cargill, yes, we looked at that and required that if you brokered our freight, if I remember correctly, but like I said, it was 15 years ago. So
right. And things have
but
changed.
that was when I was on the shipping side. That's what I pushed. Now I've been in business 15 years, so I've had claims that carriers didn't pay, and I've had claims that cargo didn't pay, my contingent cargo didn't pay. So even with all of those safety nets and saying, oh, you're going to pay this, you have to have a relationship with your shipper, and the shipper has to have a relationship with you, because a contract, you could drag them into court and spend years still trying to get it, even if you have agreement. So all of this legal, hey, do you have this? Do you not have that? Do you have that? Goes down to relationships. You have to, if you get sued, obviously, Brent, I don't want to make it sound like it's not a big deal because it is. But what I'm saying is I feel that we take it on. So I don't know what other brokers do. Work it out between you and your brokers where I'm at.
All right. Kristy, you want to join that?
No, and I agree with everything John said. And since we actually do a lot of rail, it's the same thing. There's certain things that shippers have to do with blocking and bracing on the railroad. And if they don't properly block and brace as well, the railroad's not going to pay that claim. But what we do is work with the shippers, and we'll even send the railroad out there to make sure that they're securing the freight properly, so that if there is an issue, the claim does get paid. And as well as taking pictures and all different things like that. So again, it goes back to the relationship with the shipper and the broker, and us making sure that everyone understands what the process is. And like John said, we're the same way. There's claims that don't get paid. And if we feel it should be paid, we're going to take care of that customer and pay those claims, because that's the right thing to do.
All right. Omar, you want to add to this or take a pass, which is also allowed?
Yeah, we've been on it for a couple of minutes, but I'll kind of chime in. I think that thematically, as I've answered most of the questions, and John kind of said it too, everybody has to do what works for them. right? I mean, you like not large national firms, have at it, have a great time. You like small, medium-sized people that maybe are more specialized in what they do that too. I'm always a fan of diversifying your relationships and doing both of them, right? So partner with people in different areas for where it works. And I mean, on the accepting liability for cargo, I think it's also similar. We have customers who we accept liability for entirely, contractually. I'd hate to admit that if my attorney was watching after the things I peel back from his red lines. And we have customers where contractually we don't, like you said, Brent, but we still cover if something goes wrong for some reason. And then we have customers who operate on our kind of standard contract and standard industry transportation laws that brokers are not responsible. We're intermediaries like travel agents, where if you book a flight on Orbitz and then just call United Airlines has an issue that's between you and United Airlines. So there's kind of, we do all of that. And I think that in your own business model, you just kind of need to figure out what works for you, what you want to require of people, the types of people that you want to partner with, and the types of contracts that you want to have in place. But all of it, can work.
John.
I just want to touch on one more thing on that because Omar reminded me of something. A good example is produce customers. Would I accept that responsibility? Probably not, depending on the produce customer, because there's a lot of different things. And that's specific to my environment, my industry. So that is one that I would say, no, I'm going to stick with CarMax because it does protect me, because the driver has to have some responsibility checking the produce and things like that. Now, I don't do a lot of produce, and then that's because there's a lot more risk to that. I do mostly meat, dairy, things like that.
And I will throw in a sidebars that generally speaking, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but most produce, fresh produce, is not covered by CarMax. So that creates even more angles. Now, here's the observation.
I forgot about. I sold a load of strawberries on the side of the road before. Trust me, it is not covered.
Okay. All right. Now, here's the observation I get that's putting on my shipper's hat. I kind of, as I'm listening to these answers and Kristy and Omar and John saying, what the shipper should be doing and what the shipper should check this, shippers do that. I kind of go back. What comes in my mind is probably a lot of people in the audience aren't familiar with it, but once upon a time, there was a show called Dobie Gillis. And there was a character in there, Maynard Krebs. And when anyone said the word work, Maynard would go, work. That was his standard joke. Work. Here's what I'm hearing from you. Here's what I'm hearing from you. Here's what you're telling the shippers. You've got to do some work. You can't just sit back and think that everything magically will just happen the way it should. Nobody likes to hear that, of course, because you would all like to just delegate everything off your desk. But, life's not like that. Now, while we're still on loss and damage claims, we did have a question come in on this topic from, of all persons, Mr. George Pezzold. Here's the question. How can brokers help when a shipment is refused by the consignee for reasons like temperature abuse, broken and missing seals, and so on? All right, John, you're leaping in there.
We've had several of these, so this is an easy answer. So broken seal is very common. We do a lot of multi-drop refrigerated business. A guy will forget to reseal his truck, his trailer from the first to the second to the third drop. And this comes where a broker helps you at some point as a shipper and you're not dealing with these problems, is we're able to walk them through. We've talked to many shippers. We've sent many letters to consignees saying that driver never had the freight outside of his site. He was always with the equipment. It's a letter of seal integrity, essentially, is what we've sent. And that's up to this point, we've had very good luck with that. On the refrigerated side, we have a process in place that we go through that says, okay, did you pulp it? Did you check it at the shipper? Did you check it every few hours? Did you check it every night? Did you check these things? So we have a record of all of this and all of our check calls that says, hey, this temperature was maintained here, 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 and here. So to answer your question, how does a broker help? Is we're educated probably more than the trucker that's picking it up most times, because a lot of them are, I mean, even if you've got an asset-based carrier, a lot of refrigerated drivers are new to the industry. They don't know how to work the refrigerated unit. They don't know if there's a problem. They might not hear it. So I think what we do is we help educate that refrigerated side. That's what I'm speaking specifically to, because we have the Food Safety Act that says, hey, you have to prove you had continuous seal. This product was safe throughout the entire shipment, maintain temperature and all of those things. So I think actually we do a better job than most shippers. We will sit and do SOPs with new shippers. Omar talked on that, where you'll have a lot of people just call you, you'll get them set up, they'll start brokering your freight. We don't do business that way. We call a shipper. Once we get a shipper, we get the team on the phone. We do a standard operating procedures, and we go through the seal questions, the refrigerated, what happens if a load's refused? Who do we talk to? So we're educated way before any of these things happen.
And John, you're talking about prevention, training and prevention, right? But the question is, when the shipment is refused,
yes,
how can the broker help that? Now the problem has happened. A shipment has been refused. It's the examples given by George: temperature abuse, out of range, missing seal. The truck's at the dock. The shipper says, or the receiver says, take it away.
Yep. So the one example I gave you on the seal is we've sent letters that says, hey, the seal integrity is in place, and here's a letter that shows, hey, here's the process we went through to make sure the seal integrity. On the refrigerated side, we then will go and get a reefer download. We will prove that trailer was either in refrigerated temp or not. We will go and get that trailer calibrated and make sure the trailer is calibrated so we can prove that it wasn't a carrier issue. If it was a carrier issue, if it becomes that it was a carrier issue, we go back to the other issues of insurance, and that's where you have the extra insurance to protect you. Where I'm saying is on that, I think we're more educated as brokers than most truckers, because we deal with these problems more often than a shipper normally, because most truckers don't tell you if they can work it out. As a broker, we're dealing with it with multiple people sometimes. You might have 2 or 3 people that at multi-drop, you might have a person throughout the day, 2 or 3 drops that they forget to do it on. And that's where we educate people in the industry to, like you said, to prevent it. We're teaching them, hey, don't do this again. Don't do this again. Don't do this again. Whereas the big carriers, the big brokers don't have time to do that. So where I was going with that is we also have more experience or experience from the claims side, because I might have dealt with meat, produce, dairy, and 5 other different commodities. You might, as a shipper, specifically deal with meat, and you have this process for meat to process a claim or to get this customer to take it. Well, dairy might have a better operating process that I can add and say, hey, last week we had this problem with the dairy customer. Let's try this approach and see if we can take it. If we can get that.
All right, thank you. Now, Kristy, before I turn to you, I want to just say one thing to the folks. I just see now that some people are submitting questions using the chat feature. I haven't even opened the chat box, so please submit your questions using the Q&A, not the chat. I did open the chat box now, though, because I saw there are a few in there. And the first thing I saw was from Kristy to me. You forgot Omar. Well, thank you, Kristy, for taking care of that.
Call me out. Call me out. I'm trying to enjoy my coffee.
I had your back.
Thanks.
Okay, so here's a question. It's in the chat box, but we'll honor that. Who is protecting the broker from shipper or their vendor's negligence?
I guess I'm already unmuted, so thanks to Kristy. So I guess I could try to jump in. I think that all of these contracts in our industry are, kind of you want to be fair and transparent and balanced in everything that you do. And TIA has some model contracts out there for brokers and carriers and for shippers and brokers. But, you know, I mean, I think we all kind of have to protect ourselves. You know, we want to make sure that we have, as a broker, solid contracts in place with our motor carriers that, you know, both we accept responsibility for the things we're supposed to expect responsibility for, and kind of make sure that motor carriers are also expected to, you know, do what they're supposed to, and on the shipper side. So we're in the middle. I mean, I think if you, either by working with model contracts or informed transportation attorneys who can represent you well on both sides in your relationship with your shipper customers and your motor carrier partnerships, you know, is it fair to just say we kind of have to protect ourselves? I don't think there's anyone out there protecting us, really. I mean, we're working on some legislation for, you know, the negligent hiring and vicarious liability, but for the most part, I think it's important to be informed and do the diligence of making sure you have contracts in place with both sides of, you know, your partners to protect yourself. I hope that's not too simple of an answer. But.
Well, it's a good answer. Simple is good. Kristy.
No, I think Omar, said it pretty well. I mean, the contracts in general, and I know obviously being a member of the TIA, and you have a bond, and when it comes to the vendors or carrier side and there's issues, you can go through a process there where it's almost like a mediated situation to try to work through an issue that we've had to do before in the past as well. Same with the shipper. A lot of it just comes down to the contracts, the attorneys, that type of situation, how big of a customer it is, what are you willing to do or not do. So there's a lot of things that go into that, but contracts are the most important piece of it. And again, the TIA, helps support these things as well. So.
Okay. Now, changing gears, different topic, offer loss and damage. Our favorite subject, double payment problem. So here's the question, well, the predicate and the question. Virtually every shipper of any size has been burned when they have paid a broker and then the broker did not pay the carrier who actually moved the load, who then seeks payment from the shipper based on their rights under the bill of lading contract. Do you have any ideas as to how a shipper who would like to use a broker can protect themselves against this risk? Now, I obviously like to hear from our business brokers as opposed to our government broker, but we're going to start with our governmental broker, which is Chris. And Chris, here's the question for you. What has been or is the role of TIA in helping to mitigate this problem?
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I know Kristy and I know John and Omar can touch on this as well. But one of the things we've been dealing with and the industry's been dealing with for quite a long time in this vein is double brokering. That's something we worked very hard to address in MAP 21, which was the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill signed into law in 2012. We had some language in there that not only in collaboration with OOIDA and the American Trucking Associations, language that not only increased the broker bond to $75,000, but the second part of it is if we want a level playing field for all companies that are brokering freight to be properly registered, to have the appropriate bond requirements in place, so that it doesn't give the industry a bad name, because obviously there's a lot of chameleon bad actors out there in terms of carriers and brokers, and carriers constantly double brokering. We still hear about it. Basically, I get probably maybe 5 to 6 emails a week from members talking about double brokering and the issue that's going on. I flag those. I send those over to the agency, and quite frankly, to be candid, not a lot happens in this space. So while there is text in the law that really calls out unauthorized brokerage activities, specifically double brokering, there's not a lot on the enforcement side, unfortunately. Something we've seen recently, Brent, that's kind of an additional loophole, if you will, or another way to kind of skirt regulations that we're trying to address through this transportation reauthorization bill that's currently set to expire this September, is these dispatch services. There are obviously legitimate dispatch services out there who operate as bona fide agent of carriers. There's also some unscrupulous companies out there who call themselves dispatch services, who are doing this for multiple different carriers. And what they're doing is essentially arranging transportation for compensation. Does that sound familiar to people? That's the definition by the federal code of brokerage. These folks are not licensed. They don't have a bond or trust in place, and creates a lot of these payment issues that we hear from our friends over at small carriers over at OIDA. And, we're laser focused on this, getting the agency the appropriate resources and get them to act on this from an enforcement side is a struggle. It's not specific to this issue. It's specific to a lot of different issues. I just wrap up, Brent, you and I have been working on the number of different issues that were included in MAP 21 and what's the current status of them. I mean, we're 9 years removed from when MAP 21 was signed into law. And every year Brent comes to me and says, hey, can you update this chart of where things are? And it's a pretty easy update because a lot of them there's no action on them still 9 years later. And this is obviously one of the things in enforcement and with double brokering that continues to exist out there with really no teeth to it. With it being law, obviously there's a private action that can be taken against principals or carriers at those motor carrier companies, and that has happened. We are familiar with a number of those cases, but from a legislative perspective, that's really kind of the state of play currently, Brent.
All right, now, Chris, I want to just backtrack something you said. You said you get 5 or 6 emails a week from members regarding a double brokering situation. And by the way, just so we're all clear for the audience, double brokering is a little bit not quite the right word, but it's the word people use. So double brokering means that a shipper or a broker tenders a load to a certain carrier. And then unbeknownst to that shipper or broker is tendering the load, that carrier re-tenders the load to another carrier. And then I know of situations where it gets re-tendered 3, 4, 5, 6 times. One of the things MAP 21 did make clear that to do that, you have to have a broker's license. But without getting into the details of MAP 21, Chris, you said you get 5 or 6 emails a week on that, and then you refer them to the agency. Just so we're all clear, what agency are you referring to?
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Sorry, Brent.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, that's fine. And what I'm hearing from you is they're not that they either don't have the interest or the resources to enforce this law.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's an interest. I think there's interest there. There may not be, but I think it's more of a resource issue. That's the kind of hey, in Washington D.C., that's the general complaint from any agency is, hey, we don't have enough resources. Go to Congress and get us more appropriations money.
Well, do they even send a letter? Do they do anything? Can you give us an example of any enforcement activity you've seen? I mean, just even sending a letter.
Yeah, I'm aware of a couple situations where members have come to me and received a letter that they, specific to double brokering, be like, hey, this broker didn't pay the carrier or didn't pay the shipper, whatever the case may be. But yeah, I mean, what I generally do is I know obviously the Associate Administrator of Enforcement. I send those over to the gentleman who's in that position. We highly recommend. We have guidance through our association that there's a National Consumers Complaint Database within FMCSA. We highly recommend that folks go in there if they have an issue to put the carrier's information in there, put the broker's information if there's another broker involved, whatever the case may be. But one of the key things out of MAP 21 that we continue to harp on the agency to get done is what's called the Unified Registration System Part 2, which requires the agency to put a unique identifier per authority that each company has. What we like to see is that, if you're a broker, you have a B after your number. If you're a carrier, you have a C, freight forwarder, an F, whatever the case may be. So that when you're working with that particular entity and you think that they're a carrier, it's a little bit more clear. I wouldn't say crystal clear. It's a little bit more clear on which entity you're working with. A lot of these companies may come in as a carrier, but also have brokerage authority. What we see oftentimes is they just quote unquote flip the load to a friend, aka broker it out without a license or authority. But I think if they can put some guidance out to the industry and clear up, the identifier per authority, that would certainly be a step in the right direction. It's not going to solve the issue, obviously, but it'd be a step in the right direction.
Okay, Chris, thank you. Again, I just want to say it's been my experience. Chris is always ready and able and available to share information with people if you want to contact him. Now, we're moving on in time. I want to just give we've got one more question after this, but I do want to give the business panelists, the business brokers, a chance. Do you have any ideas as to how a shipper who would like to use a broker can protect themselves against the risk of the broker not paying the carrier? John.
Yeah, I would include it in the contract, the carrier's contract as well. It says in our carrier contract that they cannot go back on the shipper. We've never had this problem, but all of our shippers know that we have that in there. We have had people double broker. We've had those people then call our shippers saying, hey, you didn't pay. Then our shippers all know we're a broker. They know what we're doing. We don't hide it. We don't try to pretend we're hauling it on our own assets when we're not. So it's very open relationship with our shippers. Our shippers know that if a carrier's calling and saying they didn't get paid, there's something fishy there. So we've had it happen a couple of times where it has been, like Chris said, double brokered and we didn't know about it. We went directly and paid that carrier directly and the shipper wasn't involved at all. But to answer the question at the basis is make sure that if you're using a broker, they have in their contract with the carrier that they don't have the ability to go back to the shipper, that they have to deal with your intermediary to get paid.
All right, Kristy.
Yeah, I agree with what John said 100%. I mean, that's exactly what we do. The unfortunate thing is, I think it happens a couple times a year where they, the carrier that actually did the move called our customer calls us. We tell them that we're going to take care of it for them. And then usually the carrier that we set up, usually it's like they disappear or they had, even though you do all the checks, sometimes they can get information from other companies as if they represent that company. Unfortunately, it happens. And but we take care of it for the shipper and then we move forward. Same with the carrier as well, because obviously the carrier that moved the freight deserves to be paid. But what we do as well is we let those carriers know, because they're usually small ones, to make sure they vet who they're getting the load from, because clearly they're getting the load from someone who's going to take advantage of them. So that's another thing, at least on the carrier side, that those small carriers need to do, that it's happening with.
All right, now I want to amplify that question a little bit. I mean, what John and Chris, you're talking a little bit about steps to take in a contract and so forth, and what Kristy said, but your examples involved, by and large, situations where the, unbeknownst to you, a carrier flipped the load to someone else, as Chris calls it. How about the basic, forget all the rebrokering, the retendering. Every now and then a broker just goes under, leaving the carriers unpaid. Got nothing to do with double brokering. It's just the broker went out of business. Are there things a shipper can do to protect themselves? Like, well, John, you're quick. Your hand goes up really quick, John. Yeah.
I got a good one on this one. Don't use brokers that are run by hedge fund managers, because they've sucked all the money out of it. And that's perfectly, I mean, that's a frank answer. Use a reputable broker that a Kristy, a Omar, or John Miller brokerage that's been in business that you've vetted. But to answer your question, you can't protect yourself from that. If you set up a bad broker and you didn't do your due diligence and you didn't use a TIA member, or you used one of the other 22,000 people who might have got set up last Tuesday, you're not doing your due diligence on the shipper side. And I've been on the shipping side and we've ran into this where you do need to dig into it.
Okay, now right now, I'm going to make it a little more complicated here, and then Omar can jump in if he cares to, is the TIA, to its credit, got the broker's bond increased from $10,000, which was established, I think, in 1935, to $75,000. But ultimately, that $75,000 is not like cargo insurance where it'll pay multiple claims. the 75,000 of the broker's bond is prorated amongst the claims. So a broker of any size has probably booked $75,000 worth of loads by noon. Okay, so what about a shipper requiring a broker to obtain a separate and independent surety bond just in favor of that shipper for, say, $250,000? Anyone want to comment on that? Omar, okay. Have you done that? Any of you had that requirement put on you?
The last couple, I've had shippers ask for it. I think the last couple of questions I sat out, but I'll try to kind of bring them together.
Yeah.
I think that number one, there's a question: how can shippers protect themselves against having to double pay? I think just the 30,000 foot answer is put it in your contract with the broker. Don't just make sure the broker has it in the contract with the motor carrier, but you can insert the wording in the contract that says, that the essentially broker will indemnify the shipper against, any payments to the carrier. And you can essentially contractually protect yourself more that way, if the broker stays in business. If they don't, then I don't know that works, but that would kind of speak to John, and the other thing that I would say is I'm a firm believer in small businesses and medium-sized businesses. So I don't want to say you have to work with a national firm, but I think you want to work with an established company, right? Where I think I've seen some of these payment issues stemming from either people who open up shop with the intention to deceive. So, they'll go out and get a whole bunch of freight and collect the receivables and go to a different country without paying. And those brokerages are usually pretty easy to identify based on how long they've been in business. But then you have the other ones that, like Brent was saying, just go out of business. And I would say, and someone who's been established for a long time can go out of business. But for the most part, I think the people who've been around kind of stay around. And if you look at your relationship and the business model with your brokers, like I said, at least in my case, our model is to say motor carriers should be your primaries. They should move 90% of your freight. They should, be able to do it for less than us, because I always say there's some motor carriers operate on cost and brokers in many ways operate on price, right? So what is the market, price to get this move today? And we can never really do it for less than cost. So I think most shippers know if you're kind of beating your brokers down and kind of grinding it to where they're trying to move freight for less than cost, it's not really possible and it's not sustainable. So, and if you are doing that, then maybe there's a higher likelihood that they might not make it because they're just, trying on a prayer to find a truck that needs this strategic backhaul, which doesn't happen as easily as people want. So I think it's the quality of your relationships. So insert it into the contract, work with people who've been around for a while, and try to, focus on having sustainable relationships with your partners. And I think that will eliminate most of the exposure.
And Chris, were you scratching your ear or do you have a hand up?
No, I said a quick comment. To your question, Brent. Yeah, I mean, we partner with an insurance company and we offer the BMC 84 and BMC 85 to members. And we have several members who have, $250,000, maybe $100,000 bond or trust in place. I would just add that, also from a shipper's perspective is look at the financial company who is providing that BMC 84, 85 to the broker. Back in 2014, we petitioned the FMCSA to really look into the BMC 85 providers, the trust fund providers. BMC 84s, which are the surety bonds, are obviously companies that are backed by Treasury. There's a lot of rules and regs that are in place for those folks. The 85s are a little bit more of the Wild West. I'm not saying there's not bad. There's obviously very good players out there in the space. But the question of who has jurisdiction over these folks often is kind of blurred. between the federal agency, FMCSA, and the states. And what we see oftentimes from members and talking with owner operators specifically is, a lot of these BMC85 companies are not legitimate, who may not be taking a full $75,000 in trust. And if a pile of claims do come in, there's not the funds there to even pay claims out, even pro rata, what you said, Brent. So I would recommend looking at the company who's providing the financial instrument for the brokerage operator.
All right, going another level now.
Yep.
John,
I do want to add
real quick, because
real quick from the
Yeah.
shipping side. I
Yeah.
think this is brought up more often than it actually happens in our industry, because I worked on the shipping side for 5 years. We never talked about this issue. It never got brought up where anybody didn't get paid from a broker. And there was no discussion about how it had happened in the past. So I think there's some issues out there that happen and they're high profile and they've been seen, but I think it happens a lot less than the industry thinks it does.
okay, good observation. Now, someone sent in an unauthorized chat message, but I'm gonna just read it to you anyways. On this thing about what to protect yourselves, you just go out of business. This comment says, it's just like, not very much ultimately, it's just like brokers and carriers are one of the last to get paid if a shipper goes under in a bankruptcy case. So shippers go out of business too. And like this person points out, the carriers and brokers would be unsecured creditors and probably not get paid. So now it's about 23 minutes after the hour, wherever you happen to be. We've got one more question, but while we're in the middle of this, starting about 25 minutes after the hour, Dan, our studio manager, was our law office manager. Now he's our studio engineer. We'll start bringing various people onto the screen. That being George Pezzold, Katie Warner, Jerry Smith, and Ray Savaggio, and they'll all be saying a few words when we get to the end of the session. And then to remind you, then what Dan will do, he'll change the status of the attendees from an attendee to a panelist. So at that point in time, your screen will kind of like go black with a little circle for a few seconds. And then a few seconds later, a little circle, and you'll come back on, and it'll be like you're in a Zoom meeting for all practical purposes. So with that in mind, let's plug through. I want to handle one Q&A here from an anonymous person. Other than produce, what other commodities are not covered by CARMAC? Where can this information be found? Well, one resource I'd like to suggest is the text published by the Transportation Logistics Council called Freight Claims in Plain English, 4th edition. It's available various places. It's available from our website digitally. It's available from the TLC. They recently put out a soft paper bound one. That is a great reference. And also, just another plug, Jerry Smith's course is coming up on freight claims, and I'm sure he'll touch on exemptions to CARMAC. So now the last question, I'm going to ask it because we got some time and I'm not seeing questions here. In a way, we've maybe beat this to death, but we haven't directly asked this. What we've focused on, pros and cons, big broker, little broker, this broker, that broker. So here's this last question. From your point of view, what are the pros and cons? Because we know you focus on the pros, but I'd like to hear the cons also. From your point of view, what are the pros and cons for a shipper to use a broker at all, as opposed to working directly with one or more carriers? Mr. Miller.
So to make sure I have your question is, what are the cons of using a broker is what you're asking, correct, Brent?
No. Pros and cons for a shipper. Well, the pros and the cons. The pros we've kind of touched on already, but the cons, why don't I just work with the trucker? Why do I goof around with the brokers? Especially a lot of people have been in the industry for a while, a lot of people still have harboring bad feelings about brokers.
Yep. And that's a perfect segue into, we manage help the under 10 truckers. This is a market that most shippers don't have time to deal with. 90% of truckers are under 10 truckers. You get into the under 25, I think it's 95%. A lot of shippers, what happened is over the last 10 years, 20 years, moved away from working with small carriers because of the time it takes. And that's why brokers are needed. The cons of not working with a broker is you don't have that contact with that small carrier. You don't develop that relationship early on when they're a 10 truck, 25 truck fleet. And you might, if somebody else might, and they might get that capacity down the road. But with shippers, the issue they're having is you've got an accounting department that says, I can't pay 1,000 carriers. I can only pay 50 carriers. So go work with the big guys. So your cons are, is you're losing that small carrier relationship. You might never get to know that the next rater that's working their way up into the industry. That's where working with an Omar or Kristy or John, you're going to know who you're working with. We're going to talk to you about who we're working with and all of those things. But I would say one of the things we realized at Cargill when we were kicking out all the brokers, I mean, that was our plan. We're going to kick out all the brokers. We got out 90% of them. I mean, 90% of them were junk. The other 10% were good people, and we needed them for capacity growth. So the con is that you can't get rid of all your brokers, build the relationships with the people, but try to build your relationship with some small carriers yourself also.
Okay. Omar, Kristy, you must have something to say. It's the first time Kristy hasn't put her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Okay, Omar.
Yeah.
What are what are the drawbacks to using a broker, and how does a shipper get around them?
I mean, I don't necessarily think there's a drawback, but I think that, I mean, okay, so maybe the most popular one is that we don't provide drop trailers that easily, right? But it's kind of like I'll always say, there should be parts of your business where you partner with different providers for different reasons. And most of the kinds of shippers who we work with, again, high level, move 90% of their freight on asset-based players who are giving them drop trailers and maybe dedicated round trips or just dedicated regional. And then at a high volume level or a low volume level, a lot of times, you know, the broker can be there to provide extra capacity when your primaries are not available. I mean, that's at least our business model. So whether you're shipping, you know, 2,000 loads a day or you're shipping 2 loads a day, there will probably be a time when the primary person who you like to work with doesn't have a truck. So you need a reliable alternative there, I think. But at the same time, depending on the volume that you're shipping, having a strategic go-to broker as a primary, it can work also. It's not really what I do, but I see a lot of people do it well, because maybe you just have a short lead time in whatever your manufacturing cycle is, and a lot of motor carriers can't respond to short lead time that easily because they have their network mapped out, whatever the drivers are doing for the week, they have it planned more. And then there's spikes in demand. All of us saw last month, February, with the polar vortex, just different things happen. So very generally, I say a lot of large shippers forecast demand in a linear way. You think you're going to have 5 loads a week and there's going to be 1 a day, but it doesn't really work that way. Maybe you have 3 on Monday, 2 on Tuesday. And so it's advantageous to have alternatives, but I'm a fan of, having different partners in your network so that it runs better.
Kristy, I'm going to give you 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I mean, John and Omar, said a lot of good stuff, but one thing I will say is we hear a lot is we don't work with non-asset based, companies. So, the one thing is working with an asset based company, you're going to, it's all about their network and what their needs are. And if their needs change, then as a shipper, then they might not be able to service you, where as a broker, we have many different relationships out there that we can fill in those gaps, as Omar mentioned. So, I do think you need to have a mix of it, but, understanding that, the asset carriers definitely not only broker some of that freight out too, it's not always on their assets, but it's also based on where their needs are. And as you know, we have needs as well, but we have a lot of other options as brokers to us that we can provide shippers instead of just having our asset.
All right. Well, listen, I want to just thank the panelists. I'm hoping you can stick around a little bit for our social hour coming up. You may want to like leave to make a call or make a short trip, come back. But here's what my hope is to the audience. You know, the goal was to facilitate mutual understanding. And I hope to a certain degree, I believe we accomplished that. I'm hoping that shippers saw a little bit, got a little bit of depth and insight to how brokers operate, the issues they're facing. And so I'd just like to say that. And then what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Dave Nort, who will start off our cheese and crackers session. Today I have a classic Midwestern Kakana Club